She would burn this place down before she'd let you have it. My stepmother's voice sliced through the Bluetooth speaker on my dashboard. Crisp and venomous. She was standing in the kitchen of my grandmother's cabin, arranging white roses in a vase she'd stolen from the hutch in the dining room. I was parked a quarter-mile down the mountain road, engine off, headlights dark, watching every room through the security cameras she never knew existed. Tonight was my half-sister Brooke's engagement party. 40 guests were expected. Champagne was chilling in my grandmother's vintage cooler. The string lights I'd hung last summer were twinkling across the wraparound deck like nothing was wrong. Everything was perfect. And in approximately 90 minutes, I was going to dismantle all of it. I tapped the screen on my phone. The battery icon on the cabin's smart panel blinked green. The generator was fully charged. The Wi-Fi hub was humming. The electronic deadbolts on every door were responding to my admin code, the one my stepmother, Diane, never thought to change because she didn't know it existed. She thought the house ran on switches and prayers. She didn't realize that when I'd installed the Nest system 2 summers ago, I'd routed every device through a secondary cloud account tied to an email address she'd never seen. I reached over to the passenger seat and touched the edge of the manila folder. It was thick, nearly 2 inches, held together with a binder clip. 2 years of my life were in that folder. Bank statements, forged signatures, county records, screenshots, emails she thought she'd deleted. She had no idea I'd been copying her hard drive remotely for 14 months. I took a breath. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was slow. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past anger. Anger is a fire. What I felt was concrete, dense, gray, load-bearing. I had built something with it, and tonight I was going to let them walk inside and watch the walls close in. My grandmother, Ruth, died 3 years ago. She was 81. She left me the cabin in her will. Not Brooke, not my father, not Diane. Me. She made that decision in writing. Notarized, witnessed by 2 attorneys at her kitchen table, while Diane was at a spa in Sedona, spending money that wasn't hers. The cabin sits on 4 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Hand-built pine frame, stone fireplace, a view of the valley that makes your chest ache. My grandmother bought it in 1987 with cash she saved working 30 years as a school librarian. Every nail in that place was earned. The will was clear. The deed transferred to me upon her death. I recorded it at the county clerk's office myself. I have the stamped copy in a safe deposit box in Charlotte, along with every original document that matters. But a deed is just paper, if the people around you decide it doesn't count. It started small. A week after the funeral, Diane suggested they check on the cabin while I was at work. I said fine. A month later, she mentioned she'd tidied up a few things. I said thank you. By the 3rd month, my father, Gerald, told me over dinner that Diane and Brooke had been maintaining the property, and it would be fair to let them use it occasionally since they were putting in the work. I said okay. I was grieving. I was trying to be generous. I was trying to be the kind of person my grandmother raised me to be. That was my first mistake. Generous people get eaten alive by people who confuse kindness with weakness. 6 months after the funeral, I drove up to the cabin for the first time since Ruth's death. I needed to be there. I needed to sit in her chair and smell the pine and feel her presence in the walls. I pulled into the driveway and found a BMW I didn't recognize parked sideways across the gravel. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged. My grandmother's quilts were gone, replaced with gray linen throws from Restoration Hardware. The bookshelves had been cleared. Her collection of first-edition Agatha Christie novels, the ones she'd spent decades hunting down in used bookstores across the Appalachian Trail, were missing. In their place were Brooke's sorority photos and Diane's collection of decorative candles that smell like synthetic lavender and entitlement. I stood in the living room, my coat still on, my keys still in my hand, and I felt something crack inside my ribs. Not anger, something quieter. The realization that they hadn't just moved in. They had erased her. I called my father that night. I kept my voice calm. I asked him what happened to Grandma's things. He cleared his throat the way he always does when he's about to lie. Diane thought it would be good to freshen the place up, sweetheart. Some of Ruth's things were old. We donated them. You'll thank her later. I didn't thank her. I hung up and sat on my apartment floor for an hour staring at the wall. Then I opened my laptop, logged into the county property records, and started digging. What I found made my hands go numb. Diane had filed a fraudulent affidavit of heirship 6 months after the funeral, claiming she was entitled to manage the property as Gerald's spouse. She used that affidavit to open a Vrbo listing under an LLC she'd registered in Delaware. She'd been renting my grandmother's cabin for $475 a night. Peak season, 4 nights a week average. That's roughly $7,600 a month. For 18 months. She had pocketed over $130,000 and reported none of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was tab 6 in my folder. Diane had taken out a home equity line of credit against the cabin. $95,000. She forged my signature on the application. She used a notary in Weaverville, a woman named Trish, who happened to be Brooke's college roommate. The notary stamp was real. The signature was not. I know this because I pulled the original application from the lender and compared it to my actual signature using forensic handwriting analysis software I use at work every single day. I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my life tracing money through shell companies, finding the invisible strings that connect a lie to a ledger. I testify in federal court. I've helped the FBI dismantle Ponzi schemes. And my stepmother thought she could forge my name on a loan application with a ballpoint pen and get away with it. People always ask me why I didn't act immediately. Why I waited 2 years. The answer is the same reason you don't swing at a hornet. You locate the nest first. Then you come back at night with a plan. The moment I truly broke was not the discovery of the fraud. It was a Tuesday in October, 14 months ago. I was at a gas station in Asheville, filling up my tank when my phone buzzed. It was a Google alert I'd set for my own name. A new listing had appeared on Vrbo. The title read, "Charming Mountain Escape Perfect for Weddings and Retreats." The photos showed my grandmother's cabin, redecorated beyond recognition, with a pricing tier that included a $3,500 weekend wedding package. And in the description, under the About the Host section, it said, "This property has been in our family for generations. We love sharing our mountain home with guests who appreciate the beauty of the Blue Ridge." Our family. Our mountain home. I sat in my car at that gas station for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something drain out of me, like water leaving a bathtub, slow and irreversible. When it was done, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't their stepdaughter or their half-sister or their family accountant or their pushover. I was an auditor. And I had just opened a case. I spent the next 14 months building the file. I pulled every Vrbo transaction through a subpoena. I filed quietly through a lawyer in Raleigh who owed me a favor. I documented the LLC, the fraudulent affidavit, the forged HELOC application. I obtained security footage from the lender's office showing Diane signing documents while I was 200 miles away at a conference in Richmond. I recorded phone calls. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. Every time Diane or my father mentioned the cabin, the money, the rental income, I was recording. I had Gerald on tape saying, "Just don't tell Hannah. She'll make a fuss." I had Diane on tape telling Brooke, "If she ever finds out, we'll say she agreed to it. Who's going to believe her over all three of us? Who's going to believe her?" That sentence lived in my chest like a splinter for months. It was the engine that kept me going when I wanted to quit, when I wanted to just sell the cabin and walk away and never speak to any of them again. They were counting on me being small. They were counting on me folding. They didn't know I was building a federal case. Now it was the night of Brooke's engagement party. The guests would arrive at 7. It was 5:47. On my phone screen, I watched Diane arranging place cards on the dining table. My father was in the den, watching football, drinking bourbon from a glass that belonged to my grandmother. Brooke was upstairs doing her makeup, practicing her surprised face in the mirror, even though she'd planned every detail of this party herself. I had made one phone call that morning. It was to Special Agent Morales at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in Charlotte. I'd been in contact with her for 3 months. She had reviewed my file. She had verified the forged signatures. She had confirmed that Diane's LLC had not filed a single tax return in 18 months of operation, $130,000 in unreported income. That's not a civil penalty. That's a criminal referral. Agent Morales was bringing 2 colleagues. They would arrive at 7:45, 15 minutes after the last guest. I wanted an audience. Not for cruelty. For witnesses. My family had spent 3 years telling everyone I was unstable, difficult, estranged by choice. I needed 40 people to see the truth walk through the door wearing a badge. At 6:58, I watched the first headlights come up the mountain road. Cars filed in one by one, parking along the gravel shoulder. I recognized Diane's friends, my father's golf buddies, Brooke's sorority sisters. They streamed into the cabin carrying gift bags and wine bottles, hugging and laughing, complimenting the string lights, exclaiming over the view. Nobody questioned who owned the house. Nobody asked. Diane greeted them at the door like a queen welcoming subjects into her palace. At 7:15, Brooke made her entrance. White dress, diamond earrings, her fiancé Kyle on her arm. He looked like every guy who peaked in a fraternity. Good jaw, empty eyes. Diane clinked a glass and made a toast. To Brooke and Kyle. And to this beautiful mountain home that's been the heart of our family for years. The crowd cheered. My grandmother's home. The one Diane had gutted, monetized, and lied about. The heart of their family. I clenched my jaw so hard I tasted copper. At 7:30, I started the engine. I drove slowly up the mountain road, no headlights. I parked behind the last row of cars and stepped out. The air was freezing. November in the Blue Ridge cuts through you like a scalpel. I pulled my coat tight and walked up the stone path toward the front door, the manila folder under my arm. I didn't knock. It was my house. The room went quiet in stages. The people closest to the door noticed me first. Then the whispers rippled outward like a stone dropped in water. Diane saw me from across the room. Her smile didn't falter. It hardened. Hannah. She said my name the way you'd say the name of a stain on a white couch. What a surprise. We didn't think you'd come. You didn't invite me, I said. But that's fine. I don't need an invitation to enter my own home. My father stood up from the couch. His face was already flushed from the bourbon. Hannah, this isn't the time. Brooke is celebrating. I know, I said. I'll be quick. Brooke was standing by the fireplace, her hand on Kyle's arm, her eyes wide and wet with the kind of manufactured panic she'd perfected in high school. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Why do you always have to ruin everything? I looked at her. For a second, I saw the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. The one who called me Hanny. The one who cried when I left for college. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who had watched her mother forge my name and said nothing. I'm not ruining anything, Brooke, I said. I'm correcting the record. I placed the folder on the dining table, right on top of the place cards. I opened it to the first page. The deed. My name, stamped and recorded. This is my house, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. It was left to me by my grandmother, Ruth, in a will that was executed legally and recorded at the county clerk's office 3 years ago. Every person in this room has been told otherwise. You've been told this is Diane's house, or Gerald's house, or the family's house. It's not. It's mine. And the people hosting this party tonight are trespassers. The silence was so complete, I could hear the fire popping. Diane laughed. It was brittle and sharp, like glass breaking on tile. She's having one of her episodes. Gerald, call Dr. Whitmore. There's no episode, I said. I turned the page. This is a copy of the fraudulent affidavit of heirship that Diane filed 6 months after my grandmother's death, claiming management rights over this property. She used it to open an LLC and list this cabin as a short-term rental. Over 18 months, she collected over $130,000 in income. She reported none of it to the IRS. The murmur in the room shifted. People were looking at Diane, not with sympathy, with calculation. That's a lie, Diane said. Her voice was higher now. Gerald, tell them. My father didn't move. His glass was frozen halfway to his mouth. I turned another page. This is the home equity line of credit for $95,000 that Diane opened against this property, using my forged signature. Here's the loan application. Here's my actual signature for comparison. They're not even close. The notary who stamped this is Trish Calloway, who happens to be Brooke's college roommate, and who I'm confident will be very cooperative when the investigators explain the penalties for notarizing a forged document. Brooke's face went white, not pale, white. Like someone had pulled a plug, and all the blood drained out at once. You can't prove that, Diane said. But her voice was crumbling at the edges, like wet newspaper. I can, I said. Because the lender's office has security camera footage from the day you signed the application. You were there. I was not. I was at a forensic accounting conference in Richmond. I have the hotel receipt, the conference badge, and the Uber record. You signed my name while I was 200 miles away, presenting a paper on signature fraud detection. Someone in the back of the room let out a breath that sounded like a whistle. And one more thing. I turned to the last tab. Brooke, your engagement party is lovely, but I need to ask you a question in front of everyone. Did you know that your mother was renting this cabin and keeping the money? Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because I have a recording, I said, pulling out my phone. From a phone call 4 months ago. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. Would you like me to play it, or would you like to answer honestly? The room was vibrating, 40 people holding their breath. I didn't know the details, Brooke whispered. Mom handled everything. So when you posted on your Instagram story from this cabin last July, with the caption, Our Family Mountain Retreat, and tagged it as a sponsored post for an outdoor furniture brand, collecting a $2,200 sponsorship fee for promoting a property you don't own. That was also something Mom handled? Kyle, the fiancé, took a step away from Brooke. It was small, maybe 6 inches, but everyone saw it. The headlights hit the windows at exactly 7:46. 3 cars, no sirens, no flashers. Just plain sedans pulling into the gravel drive with the quiet authority of people who don't need to announce themselves. Agent Morales came through the front door in a navy blazer, her badge clipped to her belt. She was followed by 2 agents and a deputy from the county sheriff's office. She scanned the room, found me, and gave a single nod. "Diane Whitfield," she said. My stepmother's wine glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter. It bounced on the hardwood and rolled under the table, red wine spreading across the floor like a bruise. "I'm Special Agent Morales with IRS Criminal Investigation. I have a warrant for your financial records and questions regarding unreported income tied to an LLC registered in your name. I'd also like to discuss a home equity line of credit application that appears to contain a forged signature. You have the right to an attorney." Diane looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. "Gerald," she hissed. "Say something." He didn't. He set his bourbon glass down on my grandmother's end table, carefully. "The way you handle something you know doesn't belong to you anymore." The deputy stepped toward Brooke. "Ma'am, we'd also like to ask you a few questions regarding your involvement with the rental listing and a potential fraudulent sponsorship disclosure." Brooke grabbed Kyle's arm. He pulled away. "Not cruelly, just definitively. The way you remove your hand from a stove you've just realized is hot." "I didn't do anything," Brooke said. Her voice was high and thin, a wire about to snap. "It was all Mom. I just posted pictures. Pictures promoting a property you claim to own," Agent Morales said. "For money. That's a separate conversation, but we'll get to it." Diane was escorted to the first sedan. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked out in her heels, her back straight, her chin up, performing dignity for the audience one last time, but her hands were shaking. I could see them from across the driveway, trembling at her sides like leaves in a storm. Gerald followed the second agent to the porch. He stopped in the doorway and looked at me. For a moment, I thought he might say something real, an apology, an explanation, something human. Instead, he said, "Your grandmother would be ashamed of you." I looked at him standing in the doorway of the house his wife had stolen, wearing a jacket bought with money siphoned from my inheritance, and I said, "Grandma left me the house, Dad. Not you. I think she already made her choice." He blinked. Then he walked to his car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel for a long time before turning the key. The guests left in clusters. Some avoided eye contact. Others stopped, touched my arm, whispered things like, "I had no idea, and I'm so sorry." One of Diane's friends, a woman named Janet who had known my grandmother for decades, stopped in front of me and said, "Ruth would have been proud of you tonight. She always said you were the only one with a backbone." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the concrete held. By 9 o'clock, the cabin was empty. The string lights were still on. The champagne was still in the cooler. Brooke's place cards were scattered across the table, mixed in with the pages of my folder. Someone had knocked over a vase of white roses. Water dripped onto the floor, in a slow, steady rhythm. I walked through every room. I opened every closet. I found my grandmother's quilts in a storage bin in the basement, folded carelessly, shoved behind a box of Brooke's old cheerleading uniforms. I pulled them out one by one. The double wedding ring pattern she'd stitched by hand. The log cabin quilt she made from my grandfather's old flannel shirts. The tiny star quilt she'd made for me when I was born, with my initials embroidered in the corner in blue thread. I carried them upstairs and spread the star quilt over the bed in the master bedroom. I smoothed the wrinkles with my palms. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the valley below. The mountains were black against the navy sky, and the stars were thick and close, the way they only get at elevation. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a colleague, anyone, but I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain, or celebrate, or process. I just wanted to sit in the quiet and feel the weight of the house around me. My house. My grandmother's walls. My grandfather's flannel in the quilt beneath me. Mine. I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of the champagne Diane had bought for Brooke's party, and sat in my grandmother's rocking chair by the fireplace. The fire was still burning, low and orange, settling into embers. I took a sip. The bubbles were sharp and cold. I pulled out my phone and deleted the Vrbo listing. Then I opened the smart home app and changed every password, every recovery email, every admin code. I renamed the Wi-Fi network. I set it to something simple, something Ruth would have liked. Welcome home. The fire cracked. The wind moved through the pines outside like a slow exhale. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, the house felt like it was breathing again. I took another sip. The champagne was good. Diane always did have expensive taste. At least this time, she paid for it herself.